Nobody ever suspected her. That's the part that chills people to the bone. She wasn't the kind of person who fit the description of a criminal, let alone a killer. She was polite, soft-spoken, and always carried herself with a calmness that made people trust her instantly. Neighbors described her as the girl who always smiled. Co-workers remembered her as the quiet one who stayed out of trouble, and even her closest friends never imagined the darkness that lingered behind those calm brown eyes. But when detectives unlocked her phone, when they saw the video that exposed the relationship she was hiding, everything changed. Before I take you deep into this shocking true story, I want to pause and say, if you're fascinated by stories where truth is stranger, darker, and more twisted than fiction, you've landed in the right place. This is the Twisted Minds channel, and if you want to keep unraveling cases like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now and drop a like, because what you're about to hear is one of the most disturbing betrayals ever uncovered. It all started in a quiet suburban neighborhood where life appeared almost too ordinary. Families walked their dogs on tree-lined sidewalks, children played basketball in driveways, and the houses, neatly aligned in rows, seemed to radiate stability. In one of those homes lived her, a woman who would later become the center of a storm. She wasn't wealthy, nor was she struggling. She existed somewhere in the middle, blending in with the quiet monotony of suburban life. To anyone looking from the outside, she was just another face in the crowd. But underneath that facade, a forbidden relationship was brewing. It was a secret so dangerous that, if revealed, it could destroy everything. She knew this, and yet, instead of walking away, she sank deeper into it. The story truly begins the night police were called to a residence, just blocks away from her home. A man was found dead, his body cold, lifeless, and bearing marks that made investigators immediately suspect foul play. Detectives searched for answers, but the crime scene didn't point to a clear suspect. There was no forced entry, no obvious motive, and nothing stolen. The man's death seemed personal, and yet, nobody in his life had enemies close enough to do something this brutal. The investigation dragged on, and for weeks, the case hit dead ends. But detectives had one lead: the man's phone. In today's world, a phone is like a diary. It holds secrets, conversations, and sometimes truths people would rather keep hidden. While sifting through his messages, investigators stumbled across someone who kept appearing in his life more than anyone else. Her. At first, they thought she was just a friend, maybe even a co-worker. But when they pulled her phone records, sensed her data, and finally cracked open her private files, what they saw stunned them: videos. Videos that weren't meant for anyone's eyes but hers. Videos that documented a relationship that crossed every boundary of morality and trust. The discovery shifted the entire direction of the case. This woman, who everyone thought was incapable of harm, was suddenly at the center of it all. But what made her so dangerous wasn't just the relationship itself. It was how far she was willing to go to protect it. When detectives sat her down for questioning, she didn't flinch. Her hands were steady, her voice was calm, and she carried herself as if she had nothing to hide. Most people in her situation would tremble, fumble with their words, or show some nervous tic. But not her. That composure unsettled investigators more than anything else. They began with simple questions. How well did she know the victim? Had she seen him recently? Did she have any idea who might have wanted him dead? She gave all the right answers. The kind that could have convinced anyone else she was telling the truth. She insisted she barely knew him, claimed she hadn't spoken to him in weeks, and expressed shock when told about his death. To the officers across the table, she looked like a woman caught off guard, grieving quietly in her own way. But what they knew, and what she didn't yet realize, was that they already had her phone in custody. The device was a goldmine of information. Investigators had uncovered a hidden folder disguised as a note-taking app, the kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless you were actively searching. Inside were dozens of videos and messages, all tying her to the victim. And these weren't innocent exchanges. The footage revealed moments of intimacy, whispered promises, and confessions of a relationship that was never meant to exist. Worse, some clips captured heated arguments, the kind of fights that hinted at jealousy, betrayal, and even threats. The most chilling part wasn't the love, it was the anger. While detectives analyzed the videos, they began piecing together a possible motive. This wasn't just an affair. It was an obsession. She wanted him, but he wanted freedom. He had been trying to distance himself. And in those arguments, he had said things like, "I can't do this anymore." And, "If anyone finds out, we're ruined." It became clear that she wasn't willing to let go, and the timing of his death lined up almost perfectly with their final confrontation. Still, the police needed more. A video, as powerful as it was, wasn't proof that she had committed murder. It only painted a picture of a relationship spiraling out of control. That's when they decided to bring her in for another round of questioning. This time, armed with the knowledge of what they had uncovered. When confronted, her demeanor cracked ever so slightly. She froze, eyes darting for just a second, before regaining control. She denied it, of course, insisted that whatever was on her phone was taken out of context. She claimed the videos were old, that the relationship had ended long ago. But the timestamps told a different story. Those clips were fresh, recorded only weeks before the murder. The investigators pressed harder, and cracks began to form in her aid. One officer noted how her breathing changed when they mentioned the final video. It wasn't like the others. In that clip, the victim looked afraid. His voice was tense as he told her, "If you don't stop this, I'll have to tell the truth." Her response was calm but terrifying. "If you do, you'll regret it." It was the closest thing to a confession they had, but still, it wasn't enough. The prosecutors needed physical evidence, something to connect her to the crime scene. And so, the investigators shifted focus. They began retracing her steps on the night of his death. Security cameras, witness accounts, cell phone tower pings, anything that could place her near the victim's home. What they uncovered would unravel the perfect image she had built for herself and expose the truth she worked so hard to bury. But before I reveal how her carefully crafted farce had finally crumbled, take a second to support this channel, The Twisted Minds. Stories like this remind us how dangerous secrets can become when left in the shadows. So hit that subscribe button now, and let's keep digging deeper into the lies she thought would stay hidden forever. The night of the murder was supposed to be ordinary. At least, that's what she claimed. According to her, she had been at home alone, scrolling through social media, and falling asleep to a late-night TV show. No witnesses, no one to vouch for her whereabouts, just her word. But investigators weren't satisfied. They dug deeper, combing through surveillance footage from nearby businesses, traffic cameras, and neighborhood doorbell recordings. At first, there was nothing unusual. Hours of footage yielded nothing suspicious. But then, around 11:30 p.m., a grainy clip from a corner store security camera captured a figure that resembled her. Same height, same build, and even the same distinctive jacket she had been seen wearing days earlier. The timestamp placed her less than a mile from the victim's house, just minutes before he was killed. Detectives didn't stop there. They pulled her phone records and triangulated her location using cell tower data. Sure enough, her phone had pinged off a tower that covered the victim's neighborhood that night. When confronted with this evidence, she claimed it was a coincidence. She said she had gone for a late-night drive to clear her head. But investigators knew better. People don't usually clear their heads by parking outside someone's home in the dead of night. The story didn't fit, and with each inconsistency, her carefully constructed alibi began to unravel. The deeper detectives dug, the more sinister the picture became. In the weeks leading up to the murder, her text messages revealed desperation. She sent him dozens of messages a day, sometimes begging, sometimes threatening. "You can't leave me," one read. Another said, "If I can't have you, no one will." Those weren't the words of a casual lover. They were the words of someone who had crossed the line into dangerous obsession. The victim, in contrast, grew increasingly distant. His last messages were short, detached, almost fearful. One of the final texts he ever sent was to a friend saying, "I think she's watching me." The breakthrough came when forensic experts examined her car. At first glance it looked spotless, freshly cleaned, but under the glow of forensic lights, traces of blood became visible. Tiny droplets missed during her hasty attempt to wipe everything away. DNA testing later confirmed what detectives already suspected: the blood belonged to the victim. This was the smoking gun they needed. The combination of the video evidence, the threatening messages, the cell tower data, and now the blood in her car painted an undeniable picture. When investigators brought her in with this mountain of evidence, her mask finally slipped. She went from calm and collected to panicked and defensive. She denied, she cried, she lashed out, accusing the police of framing her. But the evidence was too overwhelming. The truth was cornering her, and she could feel it. Detectives described the moment as chilling. The way she suddenly went quiet, staring at the table with cold eyes, as if realizing there was no escape. For a brief moment, it was as though they were looking at the real her, stripped of all the masks she had worn for so long. Behind that silence was the weight of what she had done. The man she claimed to love was gone, his life brutally cut short, and the secret relationship she fought to protect was now the very thing that condemned her. It was almost poetic in its tragedy. Her obsession had destroyed everything, including herself. The case that had once seemed like a mystery was finally beginning to make sense. But as the trial approached, an even darker truth came to light. The videos on her phone didn't just reveal an affair or an argument. They uncovered a disturbing level of control, manipulation, and planning that suggested this crime wasn't an impulsive act of rage, but something far more calculated. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, locals, and even strangers drawn in by the sensational headlines filled every seat. People couldn't reconcile the quiet, polite woman they thought they knew with the monstrous accusations leveled against her. On the defense bench, she looked small, almost fragile, dressed in plain clothes, her hair tied back neatly. But as the prosecution began laying out their case, any illusion of innocence quickly evaporated. The evidence was overwhelming. Digital footprints, threatening messages, blood in her car, and most damning of all, the hidden videos recovered from her phone. The jury leaned in as the prosecutor played the clips, and the room went silent. In one video, the victim sat nervously, his voice shaking as he pleaded with her to let him go. "I can't keep doing this," he said, his eyes darting to the camera. "Someone's going to get hurt." Her voice, calm but chilling, cut through the rooms. "The only one who's going to get hurt is you if you walk away." The words echoed through the courtroom, and a ripple of shock spread across the audience. For the first time, everyone could see the manipulation, the control, the cold determination behind her smile. The defense tried to argue that the videos were dramatizations, that the couple had a toxic but consensual relationship, and that her words were empty threats born out of frustration. But the jury wasn't convinced. Combined with the timeline evidence, her being near the victim's home at the exact time of his death, and the blood in her car, the narrative was too consistent to ignore. Prosecutors painted her as a woman who lived a double life, the perfect neighbor on the outside, but behind closed doors, someone consumed by obsession, jealousy, and rage. Witnesses testified to her strange behavior in the weeks before the murder. A co-worker recalled her showing up to work distracted, staring blankly at her phone, and once whispering under her breath, "He thinks he can leave me." A neighbor reported seeing her car drive past the victim's house multiple times late at night, circling like a predator. And then there was the victim's best friend, who revealed the chilling message he had received just days before the killing. "If anything happens to me, you'll know who it was." As the trial continued, her composure cracked. At first, she sat stoically, hands folded, eyes fixed on the floor. But when the prosecution replayed the final video, the one where the victim told her he'd exposed the affair, she snapped. She muttered under her breath, shook her head violently, and finally shouted, "That's not how it happened." The judge quickly silenced her, but the damage was done. The jury had seen the real her, the one behind the mask of politeness and calm. The defense scrambled, but the truth was undeniable. The affair wasn't the crime, his murder was. And the videos proved motive, intent, and premeditation. The entire trial revolved around those hidden recordings, the very evidence she thought no one would ever find. They were her downfall, exposing not only her lies but the chilling reality of who she really was. When closing arguments ended, the jury deliberated for less than 2 days. By then, the world already knew what their verdict would be. Guilty. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of ending a man's life to preserve a secret that was destined to unravel. But the story didn't end with the verdict. What came next, the sentencing, would finally decide her fate, and the reaction in that courtroom would prove just how deeply this case had shaken everyone who thought they knew her. The day of sentencing arrived, and the courthouse felt like it was holding its breath. Reporters lined the steps, cameras flashed as her family slipped quietly inside, and the victim's loved ones gathered in the front rows of the gallery, clutching tissues and photographs of the man whose life had been stolen. She was escorted in, shackled at the wrists and ankles, no longer the composed woman who once fooled everyone. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken from sleepless nights, and for the first time, she looked fragile, not from innocence, but from knowing there was no escape left. The judge reviewed the charges one final time, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of the case. The prosecution pushed for the maximum penalty, arguing that her actions were cold, calculated, and deliberate. The defense pleaded for leniency, painting her as a woman lost in obsession rather than a hardened criminal. But as victim impact statements were read aloud, the courtroom was flooded with grief and anger. The victim's mother spoke through sobs, describing how her son's laughter had once filled her home and how silence now haunted every corner. His best friend, the one who had received the ominous warning text, stood and said, "He knew you would do this. He feared you. And now, because of you, he's gone." When it was her turn to speak, she stood slowly, trembling as she addressed the court. She didn't apologize. Not really. She spoke of love, of feeling abandoned, of not being able to let go. Her words were hollow, her reasoning twisted. It wasn't remorse the jury heard. It was justification, a desperate attempt to make others understand the darkness that had consumed her. But no one in that courtroom was moved. They saw her not as a victim of love, but as the architect of tragedy. Finally, the judge delivered the sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Gasps filled the room, some of relief, others of disbelief. She stood frozen, her lips parting slightly as if to argue, but no words came. In that moment, the mask was gone. She was no longer the smiling neighbor, the quiet co-worker, or the girl who could never hurt anyone. She was a murderer, condemned by the very evidence she thought was hidden forever. Outside the courthouse, people whispered about the shocking twist, how nobody suspected her, how she fooled everyone, and how the truth had only surfaced because of the videos on her phone. The story spread like wildfire across news outlets, documentaries, and podcasts. She became the cautionary tale of how obsession can spiral into destruction, and how secrets, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of clawing their way to the surface. In the end, it wasn't the detectives who broke her case wide open. It wasn't a single fingerprint or a stray witness. It was her own hand, holding the phone, recording her darkest confessions. The very device she carried everywhere, the one she thought was her private world, became her downfall. Technology didn't just expose her lies, it immortalized them. And now, she will spend the rest of her life behind bars, replaying in her mind the choices that led her here. For the victim's family, justice came, but at an unbearable cost. For the community, the case was a brutal reminder that evil doesn't always wear a scowl. Sometimes, it smiles at you, waves from across the street, and hides behind polite conversations. Nobody suspected her, until the truth stared them in the face from a glowing phone screen. Before we close this story, I want to remind you once again, if these real, life stories of hidden darkness, betrayal, and crime fascinate you, then subscribe to the Twisted Minds. Hit that like button, join our growing community, and never miss the cases that show how the human mind can be more terrifying than any fiction, because sometimes The scariest monsters are the ones no one ever sees coming.